Yeah, this is the God 720. They suspect flame. I'm adapted to change when it's getting me paid. So I see it, don't speak, I just stay out the way.
What else could I do or be a thug? I'm slanging with the homies, fuck hanging with them phonies in the club. What else could I do or be a thug? I'm slanging with the homies, fuck hanging with them phonies in the club.
Okay, my name is Keenan Booker, aka the God 720. Today we're going to discuss torture. All right, let me see here. Let's get going. Now, the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages supposedly are from 600 to 1300, but are in actuality a lot longer than said time period. All right, a lot of information is destroyed before the years of 600, so there's a lot of dark spaces, which we will call the Dark Ages. If you observe this painting and many other paintings which were done during these time periods, you will see much debauchery going on as the common practice of everyday life in medieval time periods of old Europe. King William the Bastard. King William the Bastard was from 1028 to 1087. Father's name is Robert the Devil. He wrote the Domesday Book, which is a manuscript, a record of the great survey of much of England. He sent his counselors all over to each shire to find out what or how much each landholder had in land and livestock and what it was worth. This was basically the first tax system that's been documented, okay, for the Western civilization is what we'll say. Now, William the Conqueror, which is the name they gave William the Bastard to the name that they wanted to immortalize him in history as, is William the Conqueror. In actuality, his name is known as William the Bastard. Okay, now, we're right here. William the Conqueror used torture to extract treasure from the Anglo-Saxons in their new kingdom. Okay? Underneath his rule, convicts of double dealing were tortured by having their eyes gouged out and were castrated. Okay? He was also the first to divide church and state courts. And he introduced capital punishment, which is beheading. All right. Tower of London, which he erected. I want everybody to pay attention to the moat here. The reason I put this picture in here is because when I was a child, I always thought moats were outlandish and ridiculous, and obviously they were a very real thing that were occurring at the time when they were building castles. All right. Now, the Tower of London was the first fortress for military. It was also a large jail and a torture chamber. It was also the first printing mint for the coin. During that time, they called it the coinage. Okay, and it was also the first zoo. The first zoo situation happened underneath King Henry VIII, who ran the Tower of London. And also the extinction of the Barbary lion happened during this time as well, because of the attitude of wanting to flaunt the power of having exotic animals inside the castle. Not only that, during the time period of this zoo, they would charge the regular citizens a cat or a dog, which they would feed to the lions in order to come visit the zoo. All right. Another thing that occurred, the reason why the zoo was shut down was because of repetitive attacks on the people from the animals, okay, or extensive abuse that the citizens were giving to the animals, as throwing stones at them and poking them with sticks. All right, now the Tyburn Gallows, 1136 to 1783. That is a solid 650 years. Okay, from 1200 until 1783, more than 50,000 men, women, and children died at Tyburn. Noble lords, child pickpockets, whores, great ladies, and such famous highwaymen as Claude Duval, Jonathan Wild, and Jack Sheppard. The original gallows was merely the branch of an oak growing at the spot. Then a gallows in the form of an inverted L was erected. The first effort to alleviate the condemned's sufferings was to allow him to mount a ladder resting against the crossbar, have the noose put around his neck, and then jump, thus breaking his neck. Right here is the site of the first tree. Right here you see the triple tree, which the Tyburn gallows are famously known for creating. Alright, the triple tree was big because it carried a lot of people. It could kill a lot of people at one time. So, the Tyburn gallows. Tyburn's gallows was the main place of execution for London and Middlesex until 1783. It was also the place where women were burnt for petty treason and high treason, and soldiers shot for military offenses. The execution process began at around 7 o'clock in the morning, when the condemned men and women would be led in fetters, that's handcuffs and leg irons, into the press yard in Newgate. On arrival at Tyburn around noon, some 2 to 3 hours after they had left Newgate, the prisoners were greeted by a large crowd of anything of up to 100,000 people who had come to watch the spectacle. The gallows at Tyburn was surrounded by a circle of stands, admission ranging from half a crown of 5 guineas depending on how many and how famous the criminals might be. The houses overlooking the gallows also rented their windows and rooftops to spectators. On a good hanging day, as many as 30,000 people would turn out. Alright. Now, the 100 Years' War. Hold on, let me go back here and say this real quick. As you can see, there was financial structure going down, sort of in an entertainment fashion, when we see how people were being charged in order to view the spectacle of one being slaughtered. Now, we have to understand that there was many financial transactions that was going on that we will be discovering during the course of the lecture, so please pay attention. Now, 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453. I put this in here because of the extent of the war. As you can see, it's damn near 120 years. This war occurred in between England and France. Alright, and it was carried on throughout 100 years by a multiplicity of battles that were sporadic in time. Okay? So, the reason why I put a war in the torture lecture is because during the course of war in these ancient times, there were no such thing as a prisoner of war. A prisoner of war was left to be a torture victim. They were test rats for new forms of torture, basically. That's all a prisoner of war was. Now, Vlad the Impaler, real name Vlad Tepes. Okay. The Ottoman Turkish Empire was at war with Wallachia. In European languages, W's are pronounced with a V sound. In 1462, Sultan Mehmed II fled with his army at the sight of 20,000 impaled corpses rotting on the outskirts of Vlad's capital city, Targovist. Upper limits of Vlad's combined atrocities put the death toll at around 100,000. He roasted children, whom he fed to their mothers, and he cut off the breasts of women and forced their husbands to eat them. After that, he had them all impaled. Dracula once invited all the sick, vagrants, and beggars over to one of his homes under the pretext of a feast. Dracula politely excused himself and had the entire court boarded up, then burned the whole building to the ground while everybody was still inside. He did this multiple times. Impalement was pretty much the only punishment, whether you stole a loaf of bread or committed murder. Vlad III would invite a few guests to his mansion, provide them with a feast, and then have them immediately impaled right there at the dinner table, with the bodies still draped over the stakes. He would leisurely finish his own dinner and then dip his bread into the blood collecting below the bodies. Alright. Now we have the Spanish Inquisition here, which is the big boy. Okay? Now, this date, 1478 to 1834, can be questionable. The Inquisition is historically noted to go all the way back to the 1100s and 1200s. This is the picture of a torture chamber here. I want you all to pay close attention, as you will be seeing many of the tools and the processes that are used here. Okay. Now, the noontide of the papacy was the world's moral midnight. The Holy Scriptures were almost unknown, not only to the people but to the priest. Like the Pharisees of old, the papist leaders hated the light which would reveal their sins. God's law, the standard of righteousness, having been removed, they exercised power without limit and practiced vice without restraint. Fraud, avarice, and profligacy prevailed. Men shrank from no crime by which they could gain wealth or position. The palaces of popes and prelates were scenes of the vilest debauchery. Some of the reigning pontiffs were guilty of crimes so revolting that secular rulers endeavored to depose these dignitaries of the church as monsters too vile to be tolerated. For centuries, Europe had made no progress in learning arts or civilization. A moral and intellectual paralysis had fallen upon Christendom. The Pope gave the inquisitors the most unlimited powers. As judges delegated by him and immediately representing his person, they were permitted to excommunicate or sentence to death whom they thought proper, upon the slightest information of hearsay, were allowed to publish crusades against all whom they deemed heretics, and enter into league with sovereign princes to join those crusades with their forces. In the United Kingdom of Castile and Aragon, there were 18 different inquisitorial courts, having each its counselors termed apostolical inquisitors, its secretaries, sergeants, and other officers. Besides these, there were 20,000 familiars dispersed throughout the kingdom, who acted as spies and informers and were employed to apprehend all suspected persons and commit them for trial to the prisons which belonged to the Inquisition. Now, what is the important part here? What do we have here? 20,000 familiars dispersed throughout the kingdom who acted as spies and informers. How do we not know this is the same mentality of today? If this is how, if we are living in Western civilization, and old Europe is yet what you might want to call the soul of Western civilization. And the reason why I say the soul is because there was more souls taken this time period than there was in Greece or Rome. All right, so understand that the cameras that we have everywhere and the overt observation of your person has been a mentality that predates slavery. Okay, that predates the African slave trade is what I meant to say. All right, now, a simple narrative of the proceedings of the Inquisition has shocked the world, and the cruelty of it has become proverbial. Nothing ever displayed so fully to the eyes of mankind the spirit and temper of the papal religion. Let us hear the description which Voltaire, a very competent witness, gives of it. Their form of proceeding is an infallible way to destroy whomsoever the inquisitors wish. The prisoners are not confronted with the accuser or informer, nor is there any informer or witness who is not listened to. A public convict, a notorious malefactor, an infamous person, or even a child are in holy office, though nowhere else. Credible accusers and witnesses. Even the son may depose against his father, the wife against her husband. The wretched prisoner is no more made acquainted with his crime than with his accuser. And where he told the one, it might possibly lead him to guess the other. To avoid this, he is compelled by tedious confinement in a noisome dungeon, where he never sees a face but the jailer's, and is not permitted the use of either book or pen and ink. Or should confinement alone not be sufficient, he is compelled by the most excruciating tortures to inform against himself, to discover and confess the crime laid to his charge, of which he is often ignorant. Okay. But these melancholy effects of the Inquisition are a trifle when compared with those public sacrifices called the auto de fe, or an act of faith, and to the shocking barbarities that precede them. A priest in a white surplice, or a monk who has vowed meekness and humility, causes his fellow creatures to be put to the torture in a dismal dungeon. A stage is erected in the public marketplace, where the condemned prisoners are conducted to the stake, attended with a train of monks and religious confraternities. They sing psalms, say mass, and butcher mankind. Were a native of Asia to come to Madrid upon a day of an execution of this sort, it would be impossible for him to tell whether it were a rejoicing, a religious feast, a sacrifice, or a massacre, and yet it is all these together. As you see on your news, they are rejoicing, okay? They bring out the preacher to see what he has to say with the cross, okay? And the news is there all while the police are carting in the body. You see, it's all the spectacle. It's the praise of death that we got going on. Now, this is it. This is the Spanish Inquisition. This is the tribunal. Okay? This is what they would hold. And as you see right here, there are humans on the stakes being marched. And they have effigies of Jesus right here, if you pay attention, on the cross. Why they are walking in the shape of a snake or a dragon, who knows? But there's deeper definitions to all of this, which we may discover in further lectures. Now, the Inquisition varied from country to country, from period to period, and as the torture in the dungeons was kept secret, no one can definitely say what took place. Pay attention to that one. Okay? Because as of right now, they have torture chambers all over Iraq, and you don't know what took place. Nobody knows what took place but the people who are there. Now, King Henry VIII, 1491-1547, we're bringing it on in. The number of executions done under King Henry VIII amounted to 72,000 people, or about 1,895 people every year. He would have your ears cut off if you did not show up to divine service on Sunday. The scavenger's daughter was created during his reign. He also made the police travel the town to see if there was any liquor houses open or to see if anybody was drinking. Okay? Now, Queen Bloody Mary, 1516, 1588. Oh, and let me go back and say this. Let me say this about King Henry VIII. I have found that is where the most religious tortures are at, that enforced you to be at the church. Okay, we will go in on this. I think there's more spectacles of that. I mean, more little pieces of that throughout the course of the lecture. Queen Bloody Mary, she is King Henry VIII's daughter, okay? And Mary first began to earn her unofficial title of Bloody Mary when she had her cousin, Lady Jane Grey, executed to prevent any possible power struggle. She had more than 300 persons burned at the stake for hearsay, led a large attack on the Protestants. She was Catholic, okay? Now, you see the date, 1516, 1588, in the Bloody Mary term. Understand that the Bible written underneath King James, who was King James of Scotland, he wrote the Bible. Underneath his order, the Bible was written, and that was done in the year 1611. All right. So, while Countess Elizabeth Bathory was still alive, the Bible was written. This is what they had to say about her. Now, the highest number of victims cited during Bathory's trial was 650 women that she slaughtered. She tortured and killed her victims, of course. The Countess is best known for bathing in her victims' blood to retain beauty or youth. Sadistic pleasure is considered a far more plausible motive for Elizabeth Bathory's crimes. Now, you have to understand that this whole thing about retaining the beauty or youth comes from a theory of, or a fable, shall I say, of the Fountain of Youth. And the Fountain of Youth was a fable that was brought to Europe from East Ponce de Leon, who got the story from Native American Indians, who was lying to him about cities of gold and fountains of youth where you can stay young forever, just to get him out of their tribe, and it was trying to send them to the cannibal tribes that was up the Everglades, and this was located in Florida. So East Ponce de Leon brought that back, and this theory or this fable has been used to support the cosmetic industry and also the destruction of the self-esteem of women in Western civilization ever since. And also, to even go in further, the whole thing about, you know, aging cream and, you know, all of that stuff they do towards the elderly in our country, even with the whole thing of having a goatee. I mean not a goatee, but the male wig is what I want to say, to hide the bald spot. Okay, so African slave trade, 1600, 1900. We all know what that was about. 30 Years War. Another war that was going on during the ending of the time period of which I'm presenting you today, 700 to 1700. And I put 2 wars in here. The reason why I put 2 wars in here, there's a multiplicity of wars, battles, successions, revolutions, and rebellions is what they'll all be titled under. They're all titled different. Okay, so you have to understand it's still all the same thing, and that thing is conflict or religious conflict is another thing you'll find. Okay, not necessarily territorial. The majority of the conflict was based off of he say, she say, and religious conflict. Okay, but it ended in high-level human sacrifice and high-level ritualistic murder that was going on, basically. Okay. And the thing is that some of this ritualistic murder, we can't really tell until we do further research on if it was intended to be ritualistic or not, or they were just so highly sadistic that it ended up being ritualistic through the entertainment of sufficing one's sadism. Okay? Now, the witch hunts from 1450 to 1750. Okay, let's go over a little witch hunt a little bit. Now, witch hunts and Spanish Inquisition are interchangeable titles. They like to do this to mess up the chronology of history and also to hide attitudes. If we were to go into witch hunts and we do a thorough research of the witch hunts, we could see clearly that there is a hatred towards women and towards the feminine principle overall. Okay, now when we look into the Spanish Inquisition, we're hiding the fact that it was women being tortured during the course of the Spanish Inquisition by using it as a guise of going against religion or going against the one true God, which they try to make it seem as if Christianity is only bowing to the one true God, when actuality Christianity is a Trinitarian religion. It's a polytheistic religion, meaning that they worship the God, the Spirit, and the God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost. Okay, those are 3 different entities. Okay, so I state that to state that, you know, there's a lot throughout history, a lot of people have been against Christianity and Catholicism, so they'll use that as the core to the Spanish Inquisition to hide the fact that there was a lot of high-level perversion going on and a lot of high-level slaughter towards women. And not only that, there's a deeper level with all of this that is hiding the fact that fear and violence is attached to the female's hormonal structure. Okay? And that's another part of the whole attack on women in this whole thing. Okay, now let's keep it moving. The witch hunts, estimated over 9 million executions. Okay, the accused was taken to a convenient room, stripped naked and tied in a sitting position on a stool for 24 hours without food or sleep. All witches had a familiar, a sort of pet demon that visited them at least once a day. And the demon might take any shape. If any living creature, including a fly, was seen in the room during this period, it had to be the witch's familiar, and her doom was sealed. In case no flies showed up, Hopkins still wasn't beaten. Witches fed their familiars from a spot on the body from which the demon sucked a special fluid. This place was insensible to pain, so Hopkins and his assistant stuck needles into the accused until she either confessed to being a witch or they found some numb spot. There are several such spots in the human anatomy, and one of Hopkins' helpers, an old woman named Gotti Phillips, knew them all. However, in case Gotti was off testing another witch, Hopkins could usually get a girl to confess by saying, "I have tested you everywhere with this long needle, except up the nipples of your breast. Do you confess, or shall I try there next?" Most girls confessed. Now, the long needle was a torture that was usually applied underneath the fingernails or underneath the toenails. Now, in places where women were generally oppressed, they were more likely to become torture victims for things that were perfectly natural, like having a libido. Okay? For having a sex drive, women could be tortured. Now, during the Spanish Inquisition, it was believed that women lost their souls when they had their menstrual cycles. Therefore, women were inherently heretics. A woman could have been burnt at the stake just for having a menstrual cycle. Around the same time in Florence, Italy, there was an insane but widely influential monk named Girolamo Savonarola who condemned women just for being beautiful or for wearing cosmetics. Alrighty. So we're going to damn the beautiful. Now, the Black Plague, 1360 to 1667. Now, and let me say this. There's a lot of penis inferiority going on here with this, with the slaughter of the women and the attack on the woman's sexual drive. All right? There's a lack of, the reason being is the lack of penis strength. Penis dominance is controlled on a female. And obviously, they don't have any because they would be, the females would be responding accordingly. And that is not what is occurring. So, the Black Plague, 1360 to 1667. 300 years solid of death. Now, we have to understand that these 300 years, once again, were sporadic. These scenarios of the Black Plague would come and go. But it was a consistent coming and going. And when it came, it'd take 20,000, it'd take 50,000, take 10,000. One time it took 25 million. Okay? So, it goes down. And we have to understand that it played hardcore on the mind. And then there was a lot of torture. There was, you don't want to really call it torture. Well, what they did is what you saw Vol.I do. They would take those suspected to have the plague, and they would just box them up into a wooden house and set the house on fire. You know, a lot of parks in Europe are actually pits of these bodies, of Black Plague bodies that had to get dug up and, you know, dumped over. They dumped a lot of dirt on top of the pit, and now that the grass has grown at that pit, they've become national parks, you know, for that country. And you have to understand that this 1700 time period, I'm talking about at least over 30 to 40 different countries of this type of activity was going down. All right. This is what the Black Plague looked like. As we stated earlier, 1360. This is 200, 300 something years before African slavery is in place. So, the hatred of bodies turning black because of the Black Plague, because you watched your mama die, because you went upstairs and your dad was dead in the bed, and you didn't know what to do as a little child, and he looked solid black like this, you started to hate the image of black. So we have to understand, and I'm going to do a lecture on this. We're going to go further into this theory here of the true hatred of why Caucasians hate black. And I do believe it stems from the Black Plague. It has nothing to do with African slavery. It just, African slavery gave a reason and being for the hatred. It gave a material being for the hatred so they can have a hatred and apply it to it. Even though, if we were to go deeper into Caucasian culture, the hatred really stems from Greece. Okay, but we'll go into that later. All right, let's stick to it. Now we got torture here. Now, the action or practice of inflicting severe pain on someone as a punishment or to force them to do or say something, or for the pleasure of the person inflicting the pain. I will say that whether it was done for a person committing an offense and done as a consequence, or it's all done for pleasure. All torture is done for pleasure. You have to understand this. All torture is done for pleasure. Okay, now, torts. Torts and crimes at common law originate in the Germanic system of compensatory fines for wrongs with no clear distinction between crimes and other wrongs. So a tort is a crime, basically, but it's supposed to be a small crime, all right? And also, tort means to twist. This is the law definition. Tort means to break. Now, corporal punishment is a form of physical punishment that involves the deliberate infliction of pain in order to punish a person convicted of a crime or as retribution for a perceived offense, including physical chastisement such as spanking, paddling, or caning of minors by parents, guardians, or school or other officials. Official punishment by the infliction of pain or injury, including flogging, branding, and amputation, was practiced in most civilizations since ancient times. By late 20th century, corporal punishment had been eliminated from the legal systems of most developed countries. Capital punishment. Death penalty or execution is punishment by death. The sentence that someone be punished in this manner is a death sentence. Crimes that can result in a death penalty are known as capital crimes or capital offenses. The term capital originates from the Latin capitalis, or literally regarding the head, referring to execution by beheading. Sadism and masochism. Masochism, right here, people. Deriving sexual gratification from pain inflicted on oneself. So that would be the slicing thing, you know, the razor blade thing. Sadism, in which gratification is derived from pain inflicted on others. That's a person just going to the horror show, okay? There is no physical basis for sadism. It is purely a psychological phenomenon. It is, however, far more common than masochism. Psychologists have argued that all interest in cruelty or scenes of violence, including the gun battles in TV westerns, is basically sadistic. All right. Now, everyday England. Okay. It is clear from a careful study of the history of medieval times that virtue and amiability amongst the middle and lower classes, generally speaking, did not prevail. Okay. We're right here. Men, says Pike, branded on the forehead, without hands, without feet, without tongues, lived as an example of the danger which attended the commission of petty crimes, and as a warning to all men who had the misfortune of holding no higher position than that of a churl. Wealthy people might do wrong with impunity. It has been clearly shown that there was one law for the rich and another for the poor in England during the 4 centuries which preceded the Norman conquest. King William the Bastard was a Norman king. Okay. Now, we have to understand here, when they say without feet, without hands, without tongues, without eyes as well, might be sitting right there at the corner and can't move, can't do nothing. These are the bums. These are the criminals. And then sometimes they would also be wearing a note or a piece of, or a wood plaque on them saying the crime that they did. This is also a time period without cars, so everybody is walking. Remember that. Now, towards the close of the 13th century, judicial torture flourished in Italy as strong as it did in the days of the Caesars of Rome. Gradually it spread into other countries, with the result that by the birth of the 17th century there was scarcely for the finding a European state. Scandinavia appears to have been the one exception where torture was not looked upon as a necessary part of criminal procedure. In Germany, in France, and in Spain, judicial torture became incorporated in the regular penal system. Now, a pit of rats. A pit of rats was just, you know, a pit with hungry rats in it, you know, and we might throw you in there, we might use the rats for other things, but that is basically what it's for, okay? We keep a bunch of rats up in there. Now, the Little Ease. The Little Ease is a cell 4 feet high, 16 inches wide, 2 feet long, and is so designed that a prisoner could not stand up, lie down, or sit, or even sit, okay? Now, there is also another form of cave called the Cave of Roses. In Sweden, there was a Cave of Roses, a pit full of poisonous snakes, toads, and lizards, which continued until it was closed by Gustavus III in 1772. All right. Now, this is an interesting one. The Saxon and Danish kings executed criminals by hanging, beheading, and drowning. Drowning seemed to be a favorite method. Many kings maintained a special drowning pit, and as late as the reign of King John, the owner of Baynard's Castle, London, had the right to drown criminals in the Thames. John himself used to extract money from wealthy Jews by having their teeth pulled. Well, the reason why I put the line in there about the Jews having their teeth pulled is because in earlier research years ago, I found information stating that the gold teeth had its origins at around the same time period as these events were occurring. So, if we put the dots together, we will probably conclude that Jews were having gold teeth. Whether they were having gold teeth before they were pulled because of the status of the water destroyed their teeth, or they put in gold teeth after their teeth were being pulled through some type of torture scenario. And usually it was being done because Jews killed Jesus, and that's why the Jews have been through purgatory non-stop ever since those times, ever since Babylonian times. Now, the rat torture. We take one of them hungry rats about that pit, and we put it in a bucket here, and we put it on your stomach, and the rat will eat through your stomach and find itself in your intestines. It will hide itself in your intestines. Until it gets hungry again, and then once more. Okay, now, there was another one called the German chair. You sit in a chair, they put a cage around your head, and they just drop the rat in there. And they just wait until the rat gets hungry, and the rat's gonna start eating on your ears, start eating your face, start eating your eyeballs, start eating all your stuff, man. Now, obliques, which is really a word that is enunciated as oublier. Oublier. The oublier, oblique is also the root word for obliterated. Now, or obliterate. France was particularly famous for her oubliettes, oublières, from the word meaning to forget. These were dungeons shaped like an inverted funnel with trapdoor at the top. When the victim stepped on the door, it opened under him, and he fell into the cell from which there was no escape. Louis XI is said to have killed 4,000 victims in oublières. Notice its parachute shape. Now, one thing about this shape, and the reason why I'm stating this, is because I've also read across other information that stated that the cells, the dungeons and the cell shapes that they created back in ancient times had air passages specifically located to get rid of the smell of the dead bodies. Okay? So they're very strategic in how this whole thing was set up and how these castles were being built as well. Because the majority of the dungeons were on the bottom of them. It's good to stand on top of that type of energy and collect that in the castle for a maintenance of fear on the people. Now, the bators. The prisoners were beaten with the bator or battledore, an instrument like the paddle used in ping pong but studded with nails. Okay, and this was used on women as well, as you can see the nails here. Now you see some of these are the origins to the paddle that was used in school. Alright? For those who are the old schoolers watching this. Now, here you go. We got the chastity belt. I do believe this is Scottish or something of that nature. And this is a French one. Okay. Now, if we could observe the heart in the anal area, we will begin to discover more about the mentality of the culture. Okay. Now, let me go back and say this about the female chastity belt. These weren't always worn because the husband was going on a great adventure and he cared about his wife so much that he didn't want the vagina to be used, even though he couldn't trust her to have control over her own vagina. So he had to put on some type of metal device and swallow the key. No, that's not the case at all. The majority of these were created and used voluntarily by the females because they wanted to avoid being raped. Alright? The crime was so high rate at the time. Now, the male chastity belt. If we can pay attention to this here, this is not specifically a chastity belt. And yes, this is a real one from the 16th century. Okay? Now, this one right here comes from the 19th century. Now, when I say the 19th century, I'm talking about the time period in between 1800 and 1900. Okay? When I say 17th century, I'm talking about the time period in between 1600 and 1700. That's what you got to understand. So, when I say 19th century, I'm talking about this was created during the Victorian era in the 1830s. And the reason it being is because it's an anti-masturbation device. And it also stops you from getting an erection during nighttime, as during the time period in the Victorian age, they thought it was unhealthy to get an erection at night. They thought masturbation could lead you into death, and masturbation could also lead you into insanity. So they had a multitude of devices that they created that were anti-masturbators, basically, is what they were called. And they were usually deployed inside the insane asylums. Now, the heretic's fork. This is usually used in the dungeon. Okay? And this is for the heresy. For those who want to speak against the one true God. Okay? The one who wants to speak against the Messiah. You put the heretic's fork to your chin, nigga. Let's see how much you gonna talk then. The shame flew. So you come out here with the young thug. You come out here with the motherfucking waka flocka nigga. You playing that goddamn bullshit, nigga. And see what happens to your ass. Let me hear another song about a motherfucking club. Sing about the club again, nigga. Let me hear something about a kilo, nigga. We gonna put this shit on your motherfucking ass. Yeah, put you on the block. This is where you gonna be, on the block. This is what the block used to be, nigga. On the corner, 5 o'clock in the morning, where you gonna be? Right here, nigga. You understand? The children are mocking you. Understand? Y'all niggas gotta learn how to read these paintings. This is the city soldier protecting the fool from being harassed by the mob. You have to understand that the mob was the first common law. Common law is you steal, you get your arm cut off, you get your hand cut off. That is what the mob created. That is what the common man created. Okay? Now, you come out here playing this goddamn bullshit. Okay? Sing about an ass cheek one more again, nigga. We gonna put the neck violin on you. And we gonna have you on stage like that. Yeah, this is what needs to be done. This needs to be incorporated into hip hop. You understand? Ignorant motherfuckers out here. You understand me? Any skinny jean wearing ass nigga. Neck violin is what we need to put on. Now, the Jack and Jill. We still use this phrase to describe excessive brutality. We get other expressions from this 900-year-old town. On the walls of the room were hanging ancient yokes in which an adulterous man and woman were fastened together and then ordered to carry buckets of water up the steep hill in the center of the town to the castle. Staggering under the weight of the heavy yoke, it was no wonder that Jack and Jill often fell down and cracked their crowns, as the salacious old jingle, now a children's nursery rhyme, describes. As you can see, Jack and Jill are here. They can't run, they out there boning. They cheating on their wives and their lovers. And that was a big thing. If you research old Europe's everyday commune, you'll see that there was a lot of hee ha ha around that type of thing of who's cheating with who and who's sleeping with who, and his dick don't work, and all that type of stuff was going on heavy. The cuckold thing, all of that. Now the rosary beads, and let me say that real quick. The cuckold thing, for me and my research, I have noticed it to be, the first time it was mentioned is in the Canterbury Tales. And the Canterbury Tales was written in the 1300s. So, what does that tell you? Now, these are church pillory punishments. This is the rosary beads that the Mexicans be wearing. This is actually a torture device from ancient times that they don't know nothing about. Just like the majority of Mexican music today has its roots in German music. Okay? Now, anyways, this was for ecclesiastical punishments. Alright? On Sunday during church, the sinner was put inside the church or at the church door wearing the rosary around his neck. These punishments were for sleeping in church and offending God. In Germany, the congregation came together once a year and were examined on the Bible and catechism. It was also punishable if one did not attend church on Sunday. This was easily found out since everyone had their own specific place in church. Each citizen had to live his life in a God-fearing manner and abide by the commandments. This was done underneath King Henry VIII, but probably has an older date than that. Okay? Now, so these are the rosary beads. This is where they really come from. It was a torture device, not a fashionable something that you give to Saint Mary or whatever. Okay, now, a gambler was forced to wear a heavy necklace composed of huge wooden playing cards and dice. Drunkards were put into the drunkard's clack, a barrel-like arrangement with an opening at the top for the man's head and no bottom so he could walk through the streets. Now, pay attention. You see how big it is right here? Humongous. Who knows the weight? Alright, but I'm pretty sure the weight was large. Okay? Now, with that weight being so large, it'd probably weigh down the neck, and you would definitely look like a fool in the city. Also, this was put on those who cheated during games, okay? So, the drunkard's cloak, okay, right? What you see right here is called the Scarlet's Letter, all right? Now, the Scarlet's Letter is a big piece of wood with a letter on it representing the crime that you did, and you would have to walk around wearing it. Now, as you can see here, the bottom is cut out of this barrel. But there was also a lot of drunkards' cloaks or clacks that had the bottom in it. And when they put you in there, they would force you to drink more liquor and make you, pee and shit on yourself. And you'd be sitting in your own piss and your shit, okay? For a very long time, bugs would come, and it would create a very bad scenario. People would start throwing food at you and all of that other type of stuff, okay? And yeah, and as you're thinking, a lot of these market embarrassments are now incorporated into your festivals, okay? Your little school festivals, or your little tent festivals that come to town, or your little circuses, and I want you to pay attention to that. Now, this is the branding, Scarlet's letter. This is not the Scarlet's letter, but it's similar when we come to the list of the letters being used for the Scarlet's letter, okay? Now, in the reign of Edward VI, in 1547, an act was passed from which it appears that any person who had offered them work which they refused was authorized to brand them on the breast with a V, hold them in slavery for 2 years, feed them during that period on bread and water, and hire them out to others. Okay, this one right here. I also saw a number of branding irons, one of Conrad's favorite methods for determining guilt. Before being branded, the accused was asked to pray that the iron would not sear his flesh. If the iron burned him, it was considered proof of his guilt. So, as we can definitely see, that we'll have you pray to the Lord, and then we'll burn you with the iron. We'll get this iron red hot and put it to your skin. If you are burned with the iron, the Lord is not on your side, and you are in allegiance with the devil. And there will be more further tortures that occur. So T for thief, V for vagabond or vagrant, B for blasphemer, A for adulterer, F for fornicator, D for drunk, G for gambler, S for slave, U for unbeliever, HM for highwayman, F for fraymaker, and fraymaker means a trouble starter, M for manslaughter, P for perjurer, R for rogue, SL for seditious libeler, and SS for sower of sedition. We have to understand that when you go through the court files of old Germany, old England, you will see that a lot of the trials were set based on somebody calling them a name or somebody being accused of something else. Okay, and 9 times out of 10, the accused, the accusation was not true. Okay, the only reason they did it was because this person may be able to read or write, or this person may have more flowers in their house than I have, so they're a witch and I want them burned. And that's basically what you saw, okay? Now, when the branding would occur, there were certain places where they would brand you. They would brand you on your cheek, and the cheek was a popular spot. Was to be branded on the cheek, branded on the forehead, to be branded on the chest, on your breast, or to be branded on your left arm on the inner side of your wrist or your hand. And the reason they did it in these locations is because when you came to court for another offense, this would be your track record of other offenses that you didn't came in court for. Would be your brands that we see on you. Now, this is the iron shoes. If we pay attention to the iron shoes right here, we see 3 holes right here. We see the spikes. These are applied to your feet while they're red hot. And then there is a supervisor who will watch you and who will flog you, hence whip you, when you have these on your feet, and you will have to run while wearing these. These are the ones that you put on criminals and that are unsupervised, and they are also applied while being red hot. And the bell, of course, is for the forewarning that a criminal is coming. Okay, now the scold's brittle, very important, pay attention here. The scold's brittle used on shrewish women was an iron mask that included a gag for the mouth. Sometimes the gag was covered with spikes, and some even had a device like a wheel spur. Or the prisoner might be tarred and feathered and ridden on a rail, to the great delight of the whole community. To the great delight of the whole community. This is entertaining, okay? As we will further see, through other pictures here shortly that the Branks, the Scold's Brittle, was was a favorite of old Europe to be applied on women specifically, okay, more so than men, for running their mouths too much. Okay, now here's one that's for men. Once again, we have the big nose. The nose means he was sticking his nose in other people's business. The horns that we see here meant that his wife was cheating on him. And the snake on the head that we have right here means that he was having bad thoughts. Now these other Scold's Brittles right here are for the same reasoning, you know. And notice the one we got here with the pig here and the pig here. Okay, now if you see on here, there's colors and designs, and all of these colors do signify different things as well. Okay, now we have the Branks. Branks, Scold Brittle, same thing. A lot of words are interchangeable in between the different countries, as we are going over a large range of geographical area, and we're going over a large range of time. So there is a change and amalgamation of words and how they are used. So Scold's Brittle, Branks, and Head Cage can all be interchangeable throughout the times. Okay, now prisoners were put into the stocks. The soles of their bare feet were coated with brine, and goats allowed to lick them until they went insane. As you see here, there is a goat licking on the foot to make the person insane that is sitting in the stocks. The person in the stocks has his hands attached. The children are teasing the man in the stocks. There is a body drawn behind on the wall. For what reason, I do not know. It's probably a collection of the body. This is probably where the starting of drawing a line around the body began with the police that we have today. Now, to intentionally drive a person insane while sitting in a punishment already is an extra. It's an accessory. And then we also have the child here. As we can see, the children are being trained to bully. They're also being trained to traumatize and further inflict pain on those who have pain inflicted on them already. To further embarrass is what the children for a multitude of generations in European culture have been taught to do. Now, if we see here the Branks and the females here, as you can see their attire, they're being attached to the wall right here by chains. Okay, so they have a collar around their neck, including with a metal mask, and these metal masks sometimes were colored, painted, and sometimes they weren't. Okay, but this is embarrassment. Now, and as you can see, this is at a street corner. Alright? Meaning, the reason why I point that out is because many of the street corners had criminals attached to them. And there were other devices that criminals would be attached to the corner of buildings and street corners with, as we will go through here in a second. Branks, here goes some more to further solidify that this was a reality, and also to go in further in relation with what we have today. Jeb Bush just made a comment stating that all single mothers should be publicly shamed. In European blood, this is the only publicly shaming that they know about, right here. Besides all the other things that were occurring, as everything you have witnessed so far are things that were publicly done and done inside the market. Alright, now let's go. The Brank may be described simply as an iron framework which was placed on the head, enclosing it in a kind of cage. It had in front a plate of iron, which either sharpened or covered with spikes, was so situated as to be placed in the mouth of the victim, and if she attempted to move her tongue in any way whatsoever, it was certain to be shockingly injured. With a Brank on her head, she was conducted through the streets, led by a chain, held by one of the town's officials, an object of contempt, and subjected to the jeers of the crowd, and often left to their mercy. In some towns, it was the custom to chain the culprit to the pillory, whipping post, or market cross. She thus suffered for telling her mind to some petty tyrant in office, or speaking plainly to a wrongdoer, or for taking to task a lazy and perhaps a drunken husband. Huh? Understand? Like what Jeb Bush said, you don't know what to do with your pussy, you're getting the lazy nigga, you're getting the drunk nigga, you're getting the club going ass nigga, guess what we gonna do to you? since you giving him the good. You giving him the good pussy. Even though the quality of your pussy is mighty low, because we have to understand that rats, healthy female rats, cannot decipher the difference in between a healthy male rat and a sick rat. And if they were to, and when they are put in option for a healthy rat or a sick rat, they choose the sick rat. So, females with rat mentalities who live on a sick level will only choose sick and rat level men because they want to be the dominant factor. But then there's another side of nature that comes in where eugenics is applied and females by nature do not respect weak seed, so they destroy their seed intentionally or neglect it or give it off to some orphanage, or like we see on the news, just slaughter it. Now, the iron mask. Okay, the iron mask was created by Christians. This was applied red hot. As we can see, this one here has been used several times. Okay. It was applied red hot to the head. When applied red hot to the head and then taken off when cooled, the scalp would be removed, the eyeballs will come with it, all parts of the nose, all the skin of the face and head will come with the mask when taken off. Beheading. This one here is found in the Tower of London. This one here is found in Germany. Pay attention to the familiarness with the meat cleaver. It looks just like the meat cleaver, huh? So here we go. Now, beheading ranked relatively speaking as an honorable end. Hanging was considered disgraceful and was usually reserved for thieves and criminals of low birth. The substitution of the sword for the halter was considered a favor in such cases. This happened in 1609. Out of regard for the felon's two daughters who complained that their betrothed would refuse to marry the children of one who had been hanged. So, my children ain't finna marry your children because your children, the daddy got hung. You understand? And we also understand that hanging was considered disgraceful and was usually reserved for thieves and criminals of low birth. We have to understand that it was the same process but different word used during the African slave trade. They used the word lynching, not necessarily hanging. So there may be there's some magic applied right there that we might have to discover later on. Here we go. The executioner masks. Okay, this is the executioner mask. This is what they wear to slaughter. Okay, I do believe this one here is French and this one is German. Don't quote me on it. Do your research. Now, the executioner was an extraordinary, awesome apparition, clothed from head to foot in a black garment, with his head and face covered, except for two eye holes with a black cowl. He presented a most diabolical and satanic appearance. Interesting. A satanic appearance. Now, we have the executioner's robe here. You understand? This here is a hangman's hood. Okay? A hangman's hood. And we see a Branks here and some other things going on here. But this is an official executioner's robe. Now, these are the executioner's swords. These are double-handed swords. Okay? And these are square-edged swords. I don't know the specifics on why they are square-edged. If we have any weapon historians or any war historians out there, I would definitely like you to contact me and let me know why. I haven't done further search into that, but maybe we'll do it later on in a different lecture. Okay, so these were given wide handles for a double-handed swing, as there was a specific way they swung these blades in order to cut off people's heads, and there was 3 different positions a person could be in while having their head cut off. That was either standing up, or that was kneeling, or that was laying your head on the chopping block. Now, the Morningstar mace, similar to the mace we use today by word and also by usage, with a paralysis of the brain when struck with the mace. Now, this is the original mace. These weapons right here can also be called schlags, but these are more so military weapons, supposedly, but it is also known that the executioner would carry this with him as well during the course of executions. Now, I'll put this up here for another reason, to show you the reality of what these weapons were and not the falsehood of one being used with a chain, which is completely out of box if we understand how war works and how weapons work during the course of war and how you use them, this would inflict damage on one's own person. Okay? Now, anyways, the low. If we pay attention to how this word is written, it is written just like the department store Lowe's. Now, home department store Lowe's, the symbol that they use is the Egyptian death temple. Okay. Now, the low, which also means lion, the low, or hangman's assistant, was a remarkable personage. Originally, he acted as a market policeman who cleared the town of refuse, dead animals, diseased cattle, and adulterated goods. Making his rounds to the beat of a drum, he broke up groups of gamblers and roughs, buried unclaimed corpses, burnt the bodies of suicides, drummed the blasphemer out of the city, pilloried and branded criminals, and lent a hand to his chief in the torture chamber. His chief of today, in today's religion, if we were to be metaphorical with this, in today's position, the chief would be the judge, the torture chamber would be the jail. We have to understand that he buried unclaimed corpses and burnt the bodies of suicides. So that means every day, Europe, there might be a random dead body just laying out on the street that one had to clean up, and then they were done, and then they were discarded of in different ways. He buried the unclaimed corpses and burnt the bodies of the suicides. So they had different ways they did different bodies for different reasons, and it was part of his duty to collect the body. Is what we're seeing. Is a collection of bodies, and that's what the police do today. They have power over the body. They collect the body. They move the body to make the money. Okay, and that's it. That's all that's going on. He also he also assisted with financial transactions during the course of the execution too, because new tools might have to get made, new torture devices might have to get made, because we want this criminal executed in a specific way so we can uprise the crowd and get more money moving in the market. All right, so the executioner, he would make money off of selling the clothes of the people he executed. He would also take the organs. It is documented. It is documented in an executioner's diary that I have read, which will be used and noted in the bibliography of the book that I write based on all of this information. It is stated that he specifically took the charred organs of women that were burned as witches and sold them to the alchemists. He would also take the clothing of the people he executed and he would sell that to the common people. Now the common people would also come up and buy charms, or what they call charms, off of the dead bodies. But we'll go into that in a second. Now this is German right here. Okay, this is the hangman's hood, and this is Scottish. Okay. Now, hanging persons was almost a daily occurrence in the early years of the present century for forging notes, passing forged notes, and other crimes which we now almost regard with indifference. Children as young as 7 years were often hanged. In fact, as late as 1833, a 9-year-old child was sentenced to be hanged for breaking a window pane. Now these are white children. And to our intelligence, from what we have been educated about the times of old, especially in the 1800s, it was only the black people that were being slaughtered. It was only the black people that were creating crimes. This is what history has been decorated to tell us, when this is not necessarily true. If this situation occurred in Europe or in America is irrelevant, due to the fact that Europeans controlled both areas. Now, and in Europe, if they maintain the original mentality of slaughtering all mankind, irrespective of race, then we have what we have right here. They slaughtered a little 9-year-old kid for breaking a window pane. In America, that would be completely defunct towards what we have been educated. At around the time period of 1833, all white people were in glorification, and it was only the black people who were being slaughtered. Okay? So, but if we look detailed inside of American history, you'll find several cases where whites were being slaughtered and hung and lynched and all other types of stuff. As a matter of fact, I read information stating in New York, in the Hudson River, at one time there was over 2,000 Irish bodies floating down the river because the Irishmen were being treated far worse than what African slaves were being treated, or a Negro. Okay? Now, Hanging. The bodies of those condemned to hanging were allowed to swing till they rotted, or were devoured by carrion birds, which are vultures. Of those who were beheaded, some found a resting place in the burial plot of St. Peter's Church, which lay outside the walls not far from the Gyreik. The corpses of criminals were usually disposed of in unhallowed grounds. Many were thrown into the Pegnitz River, others burnt. In later times, dead felons were frequently handed over for dissection to hospitals or to the hangman, who sold parts of the corpse very profitably to the superstitious, as has already been mentioned. It would also appear that sick people sometimes bribed the Hochrichter to allow them to drink the blood streaming from the trunk of the newly beheaded. Bodies left on the gibbet were often robbed of their clothing by ghoulish ruffians who also stole severed heads or cut off hands, fingers, feet, etc. to sell or to use as charms. Alright, this is a real picture from 1919 Armenian genocide. Okay, now, as so many hangmen were incompetent, a number of people hanged were not completely dead after being cut down. John Hunter, the famous surgeon, secured the body of a hanged man from Newgate, but when he started to dissect it for his anatomy class, the corpse sat up and demanded, "What do you think you were doing?" Okay, crucifixion. Now we have to understand, the majority of these crosses and the mastery of the cross was done during Rome. Okay? Which there are many, many crosses. And I want you to observe this cross right here, because there were many crosses that twirled and could carry 3-4 bodies at a time. And also with weights on the bodies. Now, this is the real picture, once again, from the 1919 Armenian genocide. Okay? These are real women up here on real crosses. Now, the crucifixion spike. We have to understand that the fables of Jesus, the fables of Christianity tell us that the spike was stuck inside the hand, which would be anatomically incorrect. Okay, now, if we were to understand the human body, we would have to put the spike in the wrist, right at the cusp of where the two joints, the two bones in the forearm meet, okay? And that would give it a hanging factor that could support the weight of the body. And as there would also be a, this stool right here, I forgot what this is called, but they always put this right here for you to stand on top of. Okay, they didn't stake the feet inside of the main stake of the cross. Okay, they had you standing on a little post, and then the birds come and get you, and that was the famous part of it. Now, stripping. The stripping, says Limburg, is performed without regard to humanity or honor, not only to men but to women and virgins, the most virtuous and chaste of whom they have sometimes in the prisons. For they cause them to be stripped even to their very ships, which they afterwards take off. Forgive the expression, even to their pudenda, and then put on their straight linen drawers. Should anyone commit a fault, he is flogged in a most cruel manner. They strip him naked and lay him on the ground, which with his face downwards. And in this position he is held by several men, while others flog him most unmercifully, with cords stiffened by being dipped in melted pitch, which brings away flesh at every stroke until the back is one large ulcer. So, and they would also do this when you were on your way to being executed. You would be stark butt naked, or wearing a shirt, which at that time, shirts were considered disrespectful, and were considered an undergarment not to be shown, and would basically deprave you socially. I mean, it would demote you or devalue you socially if you were seen wearing a shirt. Okay, now Gold's cart. This is the cart that they put them in to sometimes be wheeled to the execution. And notice it right here in the drawing that it is left open, and the people are raging here. Okay, and the reason why it is being left open, so produce can be thrown at you from the market, rocks can be thrown at you, so on and so forth. And that is the same with this one here. Now, the tumbrel, which is an early version of the Gold's cart, and which has the same purpose, okay? That's why it has the open sitting. But this also can be turned into a torture device within itself. We will be going over that shortly here. Now, the head cage. The head cage, which I showed you earlier, which is also a little bit different than the skull's brittle and the branks. The head cage was worn on the way to the execution. So you're already butt naked, and we're going to put the head cage on you. And if you notice this chain right here, there would be a chain attached to it, and we would lead you from gate to gate in the city. And sometimes depending on what your charge was, sometimes you could be charged just to wear the head cage and have to stand at the wall, or have to stand in the front of the city with the jogs, or you have to stand, or we'd have to walk you to each gate of the city. And sometimes these cities would be populated with 6 million something odd people. So you're going to be walking all day. And then the flogging. Understand that the flogging here may have round balls in it, bones, glass. It would be dipped in tar. It would be dipped in pitch. Okay. It'll have, rocks, other things in it designed to rip out the flesh. And they would also put hooks on the end sometimes to catch your ribs and to rip out your ribs while they catch some flesh. Okay. Now, it was in the reign of Henry VIII, and in the year 1530 that the famous Whipping Act was instituted, directing that vagrants were to be carried to some market town or other place, and there tied to the end of a cart naked, and beaten with whips throughout such market town or other place till the body shall be bloody by reason of such whipping. Okay. That vagrants, so that means anybody who don't got no job. Okay. Anybody sitting around looking like a lazy bum. Okay. Anybody at the shelter, we gonna get them. Okay, all the vagrants gonna get whipped out of town. It was formerly the custom in London and other places at the time of executions for parents to whip their children so as to impress upon their minds the awful lessons of the gallows. Executions were very often occurring for people who were hanged for trifling offenses. So, what that stating is we're gonna inflict some trauma. We're gonna put some trauma down. You're going to watch this nigga get killed, and then while you watching him get killed, you're going to be crying because I'm whooping your ass at the same time, so you can get it implanted in your brain not to do what the criminal is doing, okay? So you won't end up getting executed. The ball and chain. This is the only ball and chain we have here. This is the only one that is real, that has stayed in existence. Okay? So let me go back here real quick. When we see all of this about the vagrants and the bums, think about movies like Purge. This is where the mentality comes from, okay? The Bilbos, this was not made for the African slave trade. This was made for European criminals, okay? We have to understand that, okay? We have to understand that. We have to understand that. These are called the Bilbos. Okay? So a lot of people have seen them during the African slave trade. So they weren't made for you. Just understand that. Alright. Now, the tongue terror. Tongue terror was usually used red hot and put in the mouth to rip the tongue out. This was done for the blasphemers. This is done for the heretics. This is done for those that we do not want talking during the course of taking you to the execution. Taking you to the scaffold. Okay? These are the tongs. The tongs were also used in similar fashion, but used for other things as well, like your fingernails, your ears, your eyelids, your upper lip, bottom lip, your nostrils, okay, all of that, your nipples. We can rip off all of that with these type of devices, and these devices are the origins to the medical devices that we have today, okay. Now, the thumb screw was designed, this was usually used in the torture chamber. This was designed to destroy the thumbs, basically, or used in court. This wasn't used in the market, okay? This was used to destroy your thumbs and to get information extracted out of you, so that's obviously an inquisition. All right, now the iron gag. Iron gag, as I mentioned just a second ago, about shutting your mouth on the way to the torture chamber or on the way to being executed at the scaffold. We do not want you blaspheming. We do not want your vulgarities or your obscenitaries to destroy. I mean your obscenitaries. That's what I'm gonna say, nigga. Your obscenes, nigga. We don't want your mouth running and messing up the process of you being burnt. We have to have this in, you know, in divine order. Now, the iron box on the inside is forced into the mouth and the collar fastened behind his neck. The victim's screams are stifled so as not to disturb the conversation of the torturers. The small hole in the gag, if plugged with a fingertip, block the passage of air and cause suffocation. Alright, now the thief, heretic catcher. So you got your iron gag on your head, you got the branks on your head or maybe the head cage, you're sitting in the gallows cart or maybe you're being walked or dragged to the execution by a horse, because they would tie you to a horse's tail and then drag you all the way to where you're going to be executed at. Okay, we have this on you. This one right here is called the Spanish collar. Okay, the thief catcher. We put this on your neck, and the reason being is because we don't want to become a witch by touching your wicked ass. Okay, so we put your wickedness in the collar and we walk you to the execution. And if you get poked in the neck by one of these here spikes, then so be it. It is the divine order of God. Now, a late 16th century iron crown of torture that was heated red hot and then lowered onto the head of a victim, primarily used on anyone who conspired to steal the throne or commit the assassination of a ruler. Do you see what we have here? The red hot iron crown about to be lowered onto the head, the tongs ripping off said part of the chest, and we have the real iron crown right here. Notice it being a thin metal so it can heat up real quickly and be applied. Alright, this is also an incarnation of the Jesus and King theory that was going down with the course of the human sacrifice. Same with this one, it's a Nabi crown, another form of crown that was being worn during the course of sacrifice. Now we also have to understand that when they say Jesus was holding the cross and dragging the cross and being whipped at the same time to put up the stake, that is true. But they did not hold the whole entire stake. They only held the top part where their arms went across. They didn't drag the entire cross. That would have been physically impossible due to the weight and the type of woods that they were using at that time. So this is the Nabi crown, put on your head, sewed in tight, and these little beads right here will puncture the skull. Okay? So, let's move it to the breast ripper. This one here is called the Spanish spider. You understand? Spanish spider get red hot. This one, breast ripper, red hot. We put it on the breast and we rip it off. Understand the smashing of the tits, which is similar to the mammogram process that they use with the doctors today. Alright, anybody, and I do mean anybody, who can create a device like this mentally has to be either completely neglected by their mother, completely assaulted or damaged by their mother, or didn't get any breast milk, of course, didn't get any breast milk to create a device like this. There's no love inside the relations in male and female if this type of device is in your culture. Alright, now, the jogs. In Scotland, the jogs were usually fastened to a church door, a tree in a churchyard, the post of a church gate, a market cross or a market tron, or weighing post, and not frequently to prison doors. Persons neglecting to attend church on the Sunday were frequently put into the jogs. So, and these were also located on the outside of the castle, on the outside of the city gates. We have this right here, and you put your neck in it, and you just sit there, okay? The stocks. If you were too short to get inside of one of these, they put you in there anyways, and then your neck would break and your hands would turn black and blood would come out your nose, your ears, your mouth, and everything else. Okay. Now, you have to understand that the stocks and the pillory right here can also be words that are interchangeable, and also in other locations they are completely different. Alright? Now, understand this right here, this pillory, this was, you could be charged for something and may have to sit here for 2 hours, or you could be charged to sit up in here for 8 years, and that's with no food given to you. So basically you would rot to death, okay? And there has been time periods in England and Scotland where these would be seen at every single street corner with a human body in it, and they'll all be decomposing at different stages. Okay, so imagine the stench, draw the picture for yourself. Alright, now the pillory. Depending on the temper of the crowd, the pillory could be either a comparatively mild form of punishment or a death sentence. If an unpopular prisoner was pilloried, a large mob would gather carrying stones, mud pies, rotten eggs, and decayed vegetables. In London, the vegetable stalls at Covent Garden did a brisk trade, selling worthless produce for this purpose. After the current Jack Ketch, which was a nickname for the executioner, had fastened the prisoner in the pillory, he had to run for his life as the shower of rocks and garbage started. As the prisoner could not use his hands, he often suffocated from the sticky mass covering his face. If he had any money, he would bribe Ketch to stand below the pillory's platform and keep wiping his face with a long pole. Okay? So, very serious stuff can happen to you while being in the pillory or in the stocks. Now, the gibbet iron, which is a little bit different, because the gibbet iron was specifically designed to your human shape. And for people who were fat and committed crimes, they would specifically make these smaller to torture you even further, and they thought it was a spectacle. They thought it was a show. You have to understand, this was the form of entertainment for over 1,000 years, because I can also verify that this was the form of entertainment for Greece and also for Rome. Okay, so this is part of a mentality that has been going on for 2,000 years. Now, the reason that you see here going on, here on the coast, the reason why they're on the coast is to forewarn pirates or to forewarn newcomers that this is how we handle our criminals. Okay, now when you are put up in one of these are famously known for people rotting all the way down to the bones in these gibbet irons, but the top part of their skulls would stay stuck up here because the irons were so neatly tighted to the body. So just the top part of the skull, the jaw and everything else would fall into a pile down here, if not collected by some random weirdo. Now, Mount Falcon, I thought this was real interesting. You'll find this in Paris. This is in Paris, France, okay? And right here you have gibbet irons in each one of these slots. Okay? So you have 45 slots in all, if you were to count them all. 5 by 3 on each side. Okay? And you see the birds have been eating on the bodies. So, if you are a criminal who was sent to Mount Falcon, you would be thrown up in a gibbet iron and put into one of these spaces. As you can see the ladder right here. And you will be able to see other criminals who were charged to be sent here. And some may be alive, some may have birds biting on them, eating on them. Some of them will be completely a pile of bones. And some of them will be, 4 or 5 months decomposition. And one of them might just got locked up in there yesterday. You can have a juicy little conversation, hopefully, while you try to hide the scent and aroma that you're fighting. Now, the scaffold is this right here, specifically the platform, and only the platform is what the scaffold is called. Now, in today's language, the scaffold is also what they use on sky rises to clean the windows and also to design apartment buildings. And I'd like to say that in correlation with the low, and the low being the department store, and the assistant carrier of death is the low. So, with all that being stated, what we're really looking at here is the mortgage. With mort, the word mortal or immortal, the word mort means death, okay? Now, a mortgage is a death pledge. So, we build the houses with scaffolds in ancient times where death would take place, and now you have to sign a death pledge contract to go live inside your casket, and your casket is your home or your apartment space, okay? And this right here, what we see is called a process called breaking the wheel, which we'll go over right now. Now, breaking the wheel, as you can see up here, the limbs are intertwined in between the spokes, okay? The limbs are in between the spokes, and then you have the person being rolled over on the spikes. When the person is put on the spokes, the executioner stands and gives repetitive blows. Okay? Now, this is another one where a person can be hooked onto these spikes and then roasted slowly over a fire as the wheel turns. This one right here has a wheel with an iron rim on it, and that iron rim is dropped on your limbs as your limbs are over ledges. So basically, I'll break your arm in 4 or 5 places right here. Now let's go into a description. A breaking on the wheel, especially on the continent, was so common that it almost became the standard manner of executing criminals. A large wheel, like a cartwheel, was mounted vertically on a scaffold. The condemned was tied spread-eagled on the wheel, his arms and legs extended as far as possible and fastened to the rim so they were approximately at right angles to the spokes. The executioner then broke each bone separately with an iron bar, finally killing the prisoner with a blow across the chest. In certain cases, the final blow was not given. The executioner broke the man's ribs and the wheel was then mounted on a pole set through the hub, the condemned being left to die slowly. A variation of this torture consisted of putting each of the condemned's limbs, one after the other, in a wooden trough with a vertical slits cut in the sides. The executioner then used a small but very heavy wheel with an iron rim that he dropped through the slits in succession, crushing the limb by degrees, starting at the extremity and working up to the body. This device was usually used in torture chambers because it was not so suitable for public display as breaking on the wheel. Okay, so the one with the rim was the one that was used in torture devices. That was used in torture chambers. All other processes of breaking on the wheel was done in the market for public. Now the cauldron is this big pot right here. Now let's go into a description. Other martyrs were cooked in pots, cauldrons, and frying pans. Some of the pots had detachable handles so the executioners could insert the handles after the victim had been immersed for some time in boiling oil or water and carry the pot around the arena without having the handles become too hot to hold. Saint Boniface died in this manner, his knees having first been doubled up and his head tied to them so he would fit in the pot. The cauldrons were much bigger and could hold several Christians at the same time. The victims were tied together, one man's ankle to the next man's wrist, and put in the cauldron while the water was still cold. Then the fire was lighted, and the struggles of the prisoners to escape while roped together afforded much amusement. Unlike the frying pan used by Antiochus, the pans in the arenas were large enough to hold an entire man. Now, when you say Antiochus, we're talking about Rome. But this was also done in Old Europe. And here we go. In the year 1531, when Henry VIII was king, an act was passed for boiling prisoners to death. The preamble of the statute states that the Richard Roos or Coke, a cook, by putting poison in some food intended for the household of the Bishop of Rochester and for the poor of the parish in which his lordship's palace was situated in Lambeth Marsh, occasioned the death of a man and a woman and the serious illness of several others. He was found guilty of treason and sentenced to be boiled to death without benefit of the clergy. That is, that no abatement of the sentence was to be made on account of his ecclesiastical connections, nor to be allowed any indemnity such as was commonly the privilege of clerical offenders. He was publicly boiled to death at Smithfield, and the act ordained that all manners of poisoners should meet with the same doom henceforth. So, being boiled to death, and I will also go into this, there's a process called parboiling, as you will see in this with the scaffold. The scaffold was an art canvas, is what you have to understand. And the reason why I say that is because there was a process called parboiling, where they would take the limbs of a person, the trunk, the heads, and they would boil them in cumin seed, water, and salt, and it would preserve the heads and the body parts, and they would go hang the body parts up in front of the city. Or sometimes they would decorate the scaffold. For example, they would cut off all the limbs and put the limbs at the corners of the scaffold and put the head on the stake in the middle of the wheel and let the trunk be on the wheel in the middle of this. They would slide the trunk of the body, the torso area, over the middle stake on the spike on the wheel, and then they put the head on the spike on the wheel. Okay, and his limbs would be at the four corners. So they would make this this was artwork, is what you have to understand. And also the executioners were called artists as well during this time. So being sawed in half, you and your homie, you get them, you turn them upside down, we get the sawing. Now there's also a process where you can be sawed starting at the head, and when that process occurs, you're standing in between two planks, and there's slits within inside the wood where you can place the saw, and you continue sawing down while the person is kept in place by the two planks of wood. That is usually done by the Chinese. All right. This is a torture that I found in China, but I'm pretty sure you can find it documented in Europe as well, but I didn't run across it being in Europe. Now, the strips of flesh were then cut off with a sharp knife, and the shirt tightened again. A more common form was simply to cut off portions of the body one after another according to a carefully devised plan that would keep the victim alive until the end. However, this generally meant that the number of cuts had to be limited to 120, 72, 36, or 24. The death of 24 cuts went like this. Cuts 1 and 2 were the eyebrows, 3 and 4 shoulders, the 5 and 6 were the breasts, 7 and 8 were the forearms, 9 and 10 were the upper arms, 11 and 12 was the buttocks, 13 and 14 the calves, 15 and 16 the heels, 17 and 18 the hands, 19 and 20 the arms, 21, 22 feet, and the 23rd and the 24th one were the legs. And this is all a think in your head of a potato peeler on a potato. They were cutting and slicing, as you can see here. Okay? Now the rake. This is the same as the rake you used to use during fall. Okay? Mom made you go rake the leaves. At first, humans were being raked, and these hooks are specifically designed to catch the rib cages. Okay? As the human body has 2 sets of ribs. Alright? Yeah, this right here was dragged across the flesh while being red hot. If you can see right here. This is a very poor picture. But they sit it on the fire until it was red hot, and then they drag it across the skin and peel off all your skin. Now this is the barrel roll. The spikes, and I have read information of this being used on slaves. The African American slave here. So, besides that, it comes from old Europe. We put spikes in the barrel and we roll you down a hill. Okay? Now, being burned at the stake. Now, burning alive was from early times the recognized method of uprooting heretical notions of religious belief of every class. The first to suffer from this cause in England was Alban, who died at the stake in the year AD 304. Since his days, thousands have suffered death on account of their religious belief through intolerance. But that is not a subject we intend dealing with at the present time. Burned at the stake was also favored by Nero, as Nero took over 5,600 Christians and made candles out of them by dousing them in tar and other flammable materials and staking and impaling them and having them decorated on the cities of Rome. I mean on the city streets of Rome to light up the night sky. Burning alive was the most common form of torturous death employed in the Middle Ages. One method used by the Spanish Inquisition has already been described. The most common technique was simply to tie the victim to a stake and surround her. The victims were usually women with faggots, but sometimes the stake was surrounded by a circular wall of faggots, an opening being left in the wall so the condemned could be led through it and tied to the stake. The gap was then filled in. This is how Joan of Arc died. Although the artistic proposes, she is usually shown tied on top of a heap of faggots. The faggot wall was so high that after her death, the executioners had to pull it down with bill hooks so the crowd could see her charred remains and be convinced that the witch hadn't escaped by art magic. By the 18th century, only individuals guilty of treason could be burned, but treason included counterfeiting, hearsay, or poisoning your husband, not poisoning your wife. According to law, counterfeiting was a defiance of the king's authority, hearsay was the defiance of God, and a wife stood in the same relation to her husband as she did God. So a woman is to see you as God, not king. Your wife is to see you as God. This is the original faggot, right here. This is the original faggot, okay? Burn at the stake. This is the festival. This is what they call the festival, the festivities. Okay, now there's an account of a burning at Lincoln in 1722. Eleanor Elsom was condemned to death for the murder of her husband and was ordered to be burnt at the stake. She was clothed in a cloth, made like a shift, saturated with tar, and her limbs were also smeared with the same inflammable substance. While a tarred bonnet had been placed on her head, she was brought out of the prison barefoot, and being put on a hurdle, was drawn on a sledge to the place of execution near the gallows. Upon arrival, some time was passed in prayer, after which the executioner placed her on a tar barrel, a height of 3 feet, against the stake. A rope ran through a pulley in the stake and was placed around her neck, she herself fixing it with her hands. 3 irons also held her body to the stake, and the rope being pulled tight, the tar barrel was taken aside and the fire lighted. Now, in order to burn the human body, I do believe it's 3,000 to 6,000 degrees. The temperature of the fire has to be in order for the human body to burn. So when they were doing all this burning at the stake, they had mastered the process and knew exactly what they were doing in order to get the whole human body to burn within a half an hour. Now, the instruments for flaying, which is being skinned alive, as we can see here, the instruments for flaying do not indicate that a victim was skinned after the fashion adopted by butchers for cattle. The man or woman was strung up by hands or feet, while the skin with the flesh adhering to it was dragged off with pronged hooks. Some of the torture implements are of polished steel, damascened with pious inscriptions. The shackles especially are punctured with holes in the form of a cross. Among the irons used for branding, the letter U predominates, which in most languages means unbeliever. The little coal stove in which the branding iron is heated, together with the bellows used for the blowing up of the fire in it, are exhibited. Executioner's swords are numerous and ornamental. The average blade is some 2 feet 9 inches in length by 2 3/4 inches in width. The end is blunt as though broken off, and the handle is made to be grasped with both hands. The condemned one sat at a chair with bowed head. The executioner whirled his blade in the air, and if sufficiently strong, an expert severed the neck at one blow. Now, I will say, as you can see, he's swinging the blade here. I will say this before we go into the flayed alive. If you bungled the job, which is the word that was used, bungled, if you bungled the job of cutting off a head, the mob would be extremely mad, and you may be attacked and slaughtered as the executioner. Okay? So you better do a good job. We want a clean, swift job for the people. We don't want no fuck up. Now, flaying. Flaying, this is the flaying knife that was used, okay? This is the real human skin that has been completely peeled off the hide. Okay? You understand? There's a specific knife used for it, and understand it's royal design and fashion here. Now, the strapado. Prisoners were hung by one arm, a leg by the genitals, by their hair, or by their thumbs. Sometimes their wrists were tied to their ankles, a bar passed between their forearms and their knees, and they were swung from the bar. This was to hold them in a convenient position for further tortures. Once the person was suspended, he could be beaten, weights could be attached to various parts of his body, which was often then spun around back and forth. Now, this was also done in public, but it was also done in the torture chamber. And when you look up the strapado, it's going to be correlated with the Spanish Inquisition and the torture chamber. And you have to understand that these weights right here, like was stated on a prior torture tool, that they would inscribe all types of words. So sometimes these weights would be designed like Jesus' head, or a cherubim, or a seraphim, or some other Satan's head, or some other type of image that they would use and shape the weights into those entities. And they would also write words and inscribe all types of words on them as well. Now, empalement. Now, this is very serious here. A lot of people wonder how empaling happens. I'll show you. As you can see, this man is holding down his neck. We put the stake up the fundament, which the fundament is a word that they would use for anus back in ancient Germany. So, we have strings tied to the feet here. We have a hole in the ground over here. And when we put the end of the stake in the hole of the ground, we lift the stake up by pulling the man down onto the stake, and then hence he is impaled. Or, as you can see here, lay him down and then jam the stake in him with the mallet. Okay? This one right here is showing women being burnt and roasted. Okay? All right. Now this is a garret. This made it all the way up into the 1900s. This made it into the jails. Okay. This is a choking device, and as you can see, this right here would split the column of your spinal cord connected with your skull. All right. Now, hanging, drawn, and quartered, as I said earlier, you can be drawn or dragged to the scaffold where the execution will take place. Now, quartering was inflicted on traitors whose remains were exhibited on the city gates by parboiling, as I mentioned earlier, and the heads of women executed for child murder were nailed above the gallows. And there was a lot of infanticide, and there was a lot of women murdering their children in old Europe during these time periods. Another dramatic and occasionally used form of execution was being dragged apart by 4 horses. A horse was fastened to each limb, and the animals driven in opposite directions. The torture could be prolonged almost indefinitely, the horses being forced to pull in quick jerks and then stopped. The process then took 5 to 6 hours. At last, the horses were whipped up and all 4 limbs came off, leaving the still living trunk. As the tendons of the human body are astonishingly strong, the executioners were often forced to help the horses by cutting the muscles. All right. Now, Collingbourne. Collingbourne wrote the following couplet respecting Catesby, Ratcliffe, and Lovell, giving their advice to Richard III, whose crest, it will be remembered, was a white boar. The cat, the rat, and Lovell the dog rule all England under a hog. This was written in 1435. For writing the foregoing couplet, Collingbourne was executed on Tower Hill. After having been hanged, it is recorded he was cut down immediately, and his entrails were then extracted and thrown into the fire. And all this was so speedily performed that Styles says, when the executioner pulled out his heart, he spoke and said, Jesus, Jesus. Okay? Now, they used to rip out the heart of the traitors, and they would do it, and they had a form of disemboweling you where you would be alive during the entire process. And before they disemboweled you, they would usually castrate your genitalia and make you watch it being burned in the fire. There was a lot of psychological implication that was going down when all of these things were occurring. Now, pressed to death. You see, you put a piece of wood on top, and you put the weights on top, and you press them down. The manner in which this exceedingly great torture was inflicted was as follows: that the prisoner shall be remanded to the place from whence he came, and put in some low, dark room, and there laid on his back, without any manner of covering except a cloth round his middle, and that as many weights shall be laid upon him as he can bear, and more, and that he shall have no more sustenance but of the worst bread and water, and that he shall not eat the same day on which he drinks, nor drink the same day on which he eats, and he shall so continue till he die. So they had a process of even eating where they could create basically a concrete mass in your body. Okay? And that concrete mass would be sufficient for the suffocation of you when we put these weights on you. Alright? So, the ducking stool. This is the tumbrel that I said that can be turned into a torture device. Now I want you to look at this very closely here, because what you see here is actually the psychological trauma that's been incorporated in so many generations of European children that they try to enforce this same imagery on us through our horror movies of today. If we look at females such as the one given to us on The Ring, we will see that her hair gives an appearance of wetness. And the clothing that she wears is also an appearance of wetness, which comes from over 1,000 years of dunking women in water because they had too much mouth on them. Now, that's why we see this same imagery based on the witch, because this torture device was specifically used for witches as well, if they were caught being a witch or suspected of being a witch, and the children in the whole city and town was brought out for the entertainment. So, as we start here, scolds of both sexes were punished by being ducked. Indeed, in the last observance of the custom, a tailor and his wife were ducked together, in view of a large gathering of people. The husband had applied for his wife to undergo the punishment on account of her quarrelsome nature, but the magistrate decided that one was not better than the other, and he ordered a joint punishment. Okay? So that is the attitude of our court system today. If you are immature, if you cannot handle your problems on your own, and you come here to my court, I can do whatever the hell I want to with you and her. It doesn't matter. You understand? That is the mentality of this country. That has always been the mentality, and it is a wise mentality. It forces you to be an adult instead of being a fucking immature child and expecting everybody else to pick up your fuck-ups. Okay? It forces you to think and to be a thinker and to be responsible. Alright? That's what we have today. Now, if we continue right here, the ducking stool and assisting in the operation of cooling by its means the inflammable passions of some of the female inhabitants of Ipswich. Okay? The inflammable passions of the females. Mr. Bilby, who held the office of the town's husband, was ordered to take care that the ducking stool should be provided at the south end for the benefit of scolds and unquiet women. Okay? Now, they placed the woman in this chair and so plunged her into the water as often as the sentence directs, in order to cool her immoderate heat. You're hot. You're hot. You have no power within the mouth that you run. So we need to put this mouth at a cease. And we will do that by cooling your heat. You're hot. Okay? Put you in the ducking stool. Now this is very interesting here. This is the Halifax gibbet. This is the precursor to the guillotine. Understand that in ancient times of old Europe, if a horse broke your leg, you were entitled to break the horse's leg. So, why you see the horse right here means that he is the one pulling the string that is going to decapitate said person right here. Now, the thing that is different about the Halifax gibbet and the guillotine is not only the blade, but it is also the sharpness of the blade. The Halifax gibbet is a dull blade, so it does not specifically slice off the head. What it aims to do is to crush the neck to pull off, so the head will fall off. So this blade comes down and it breaks the spinal cord. It isn't aimed to chop it off, but it will do so due to the speed and the weight. All right. So if you committed offense on an animal, the animal was to commit the same offense back on you, and that was the attitude of old Europe. So here we go. If it be so that the offender be apprehended for an ox, sheep, kine, horse, or any such cattle, the self beast or other of its kind shall have the end of the rope tied somewhere unto them, so that they being driven do draw out the pin, whereby the offender is executed. And they'd also do this for the people if an offense was against a person. Okay. There is and has been of ancient times, says Holinshed, a law or rather custom at Halifax, that whosoever doth commit any felony and is taken with the same, or confess the fact upon examination, if it be valued by 4 constables to amount to the sum of 13 pence halfpenny, 13 pence halfpenny, he is forthwith beheaded upon one of the next market days, which fall usually upon the Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays, or else upon the same day that he is convicted, if market be holden. Now, understand what we have right here. What you're really looking at is that slaughter, human slaughter at the market, is so important for the process of the money and for the shopping and for the common man, that if any crime is committed, that we will wait until the next market day for said slaughter to happen, so everybody can be entertained and watched. Now, this is the guillotine. Okay? So, for us to watch all of this murder on TV, for us to watch the horror movies, it's feeding. It's feeding, it's maintaining, and it's calming a hunger. Okay? Now, the intestinal crank here. Alright, this was done publicly. Understand this. These are public devices that were done in the market. Alright, now I have an example here. Alright. Heavy metaphysics right here on how they used the name Catherine inside this movie. And they had a lot of torture devices from ancient times because breaking the wheel, that process is called actually the St. Catherine's wheel. Alright. So we'll go in on the next one, the torture chamber. Torture was introduced for the express purpose of extracting confession, being authorized by Pope Innocent in a bull issued in 1252. The Inquisitors reduced torture to something approaching a fine art, and in the process showed the possession of much psychological knowledge and insight, the procedure being nicely calculated to wear down the resistance even of the strongest minded and most powerfully built man. First, the accused was threatened with torture, which threat in itself had often the desired effect. If this failed to extort a confession, he was conducted to the torture chamber and shown the instruments used. This torture chamber was designed to afflict all except those possessing nerves of iron, with horror, dread, and despair. It was usually an underground apartment, devoid of windows and lighted with nothing better than a couple of candles. Alright, the torture chamber. So everything that you just witnessed was done in the market. Now we're going down into the torture chamber. This is the Spanish Inquisition moves. Alright, now, this is the torture chamber. We understand we have the gibbet iron right here. We have the mother-in-law chair. We have the Judas cradle. We have the head crusher. We have the rack right here. And we have the Iron Maiden right here. And we'll go over all of these here. Now, let's talk about the chamber a little bit more. The Inquisition made torture more than merely a method of inflicting pain. They transformed it into an art and science. Great emphasis was put on the psychological approach preceding the actual torture. The accused was arrested at night, pulled out of bed by the black-robed, masked familiars, and taken to the dungeons in utter silence. Here he was left for several days in solitary confinement and complete darkness. When he was judged to have reached the breaking point, the same masked figures suddenly seized him and dragged him to the torture chamber. Here behind a long table sat other mysterious figures with the accused record spread out before them. The floor of the room was covered with sand or sawdust to soak up the blood, and along the wall were arranged the torture instruments, painted red or black. The torturers, naked to the waist and wearing black masks, stood among the terrible tools of their trade with folded hands. The only light came from flickering candles. On the walls were inscribed mottos such as De Mortias Nil Nisi Bonum, say nothing but good of the dead, or Ad Mala Pratrata Hoc Sant Atra Theater Parata, which are dark theaters are suitable for dark deeds. Okay, so like I stated before, there was a lot of inscriptions on the walls, a lot of incarnations of names and other words being used. Anyways, the prisoner was not told what charges were laid against him. He was told only to confess. If he did not or could not, the Inquisitor General warned him. Remember that you do not pass into our hands for an hour or a week or even a year, but until the day you die. And even then, you spend eternity suffering the pains of hell. If the prisoner still proved obdurate, he was handed over to the executioners, who usually began by telling him, "We will torture you until you are so thin that the light will shine through you." Then the torture commenced. Started out with maybe an eye spoon. This eye spoon is Byzantine Empire, okay? And also notice the cross written on it, okay? This is the lead sprinkler. The lead sprinkler is the origins to your salt and pepper shaker, and the salt grinder. The top half of the spear is removed, and the lower half is filled with molten metal, boiling oil, or boiling water. Flicking the sprinkler towards the pinion victim showers them with the boiling contents of this nasty holy water sprinkler. That is also related to what we find in BDSM with candle wax dripping, the burning sensation. We have to understand that this activity went on for over 1,000 years, which means it is embedded in the DNA, and it is very recent compared to our time period on when all these activities were occurring. Now, the Pope's pear, okay? This is a big one. This was used for the females, and it was used on homosexual men, as we will see here. The pear of anguish, a metal pear with the ability to expand by twisting the stem. This is inserted in two orifices such as the mouth, the vagina, and the anus, and the expansion causes the orifice to expand and rip until pulverized. If used in the mouth, the pear will knock out and break all teeth and severely dislocate the jaw and palate. Pope's pear, the pear of anguish. It was sometimes called this because Pope Innocent XIII endorsed the use of this device anally against homosexuals during the Spanish Inquisition. Let's look at it again. This is red hot. Red hot. And we insert it into the anal. Okay. This is the iron boot. Iron boot is not the same as the iron shoe. Iron boot, specifically being Spanish, used in the torture chamber. We put both feet inside the boot, and then we put wedges in between the legs. These wedges, being of wood, are slammed with a mallet until the legs and the feet and the legs and the knees are completely separated, and the bones of the legs are crushed. And obviously, the cartilage of the knee joint is completely destroyed. Okay, this is the foot press. Now, also understand, while we're looking at all this pressing and all this mallet, you have been subconsciously trained with images of this when you look at the slapstick cartoons such as Tom and Jerry, you know, the Road Runner, Mighty Mouse, so on and so forth. There was always a slamming of a mallet to make a hand flat, or to make a foot flat, or to make a head flat. This is where the psychological positions of all of this comes from. You understand? Including your horror movies, okay? Including the repetitive images of houses being burnt up and cars blowing up is the repetitive images they've seen of stuff being burnt down during old Europe. Okay, as arson is a large crime amongst the old documents, the old criminal documents of Europe. Now, when we look at this, it's not as large as you may perceive it to be. This will either fit over the femur area of the leg, the lower leg from the knee to the ankle, or it will go over the thigh. And obviously, as you can see through these pegs, it will obliterate the muscle and tear up the bone and completely crush the bone. As you can see, there's a second one sitting right here, is standing up. Okay. Scavenger's daughter, as you can see how the person is fitting inside the scavenger's daughter, but in this one, usually the body would be on the outside of the bars, and the legs would be chained to be underneath the feet. With this being squeezed together, you can go through some very, very serious, breaking of the bone. Now here, this is the one that's gonna make your head damn near blow up. This will make it start bleeding at the nose, bleeding at the mouth, bleeding at the ears, bleeding at the eyes and shit. When you get into this one, and they squeeze you in with the pumping device that's at the top to make it tighter and tighter. Okay, this is also a Scavenger's Daughter redone, the deluxe. Okay, this is a skull crusher. You put your head up in here, we twist it down, we crush your skull, make your eyes pop out your head first, so on and so forth. This one has pegs on it more so than this one has spikes. Okay, now the pit and the pendulum. The pit and the pendulum historically is first mentioned with Edgar Allan Poe, which Edgar Allan Poe would write fantasy stories. Is this a real device? Personally, I don't think so. I don't think so because of space reasons. There's a lot of other reasons. It took too long. Well, they didn't really care about time. when it came to the torture devices, even though a lot of tortures were timed, okay, but they didn't really care about they had all day to do it, basically is what I'm saying. But they would time you on how long you sat in a device. And as you can see here, they would this person was tied down on the bar underneath the pendulum, and hungry rats were released on him while the pendulum slowly comes down inch by inch as it's swinging back and forth. That's how they were designed, were to come down swinging back and forth from the sky. Now this is a real pendulum, and supposedly this comes out of England, but as I stated before, there's no historical documents describing this this pendulum situation and how it was used besides Edgar Allan Poe. All right, but supposedly this is one that's dated from the 17th century. Okay, now the water torture. The water torture was considered the most terrible and used when other means had failed. The prisoner was tied to a ladder with his head lower than his feet. An iron prong was used to force his mouth open, and a strip of linen pushed down the throat. The water was slowly dropped on the linen until the prisoner, in his efforts to avoid being strangled, swallowed the strip. The strip was gradually withdrawn, covered with blood and mucus. The process was then repeated. The amount of water used was carefully measured and could never exceed 8 quarts at any one time, otherwise the prisoner might suffocate. Now, they had it mastered. They had this process mastered to where they could bloat your body up to be 3-4 times bigger than it without you drowning, okay? Without you internally drowning through your liver, okay? And they could blow your body up and blow your eyeballs up to the point where your eyeballs are uncontrollable in your head and you are completely fat and bloated with water, okay? Those specific circumstances differed. In every case, a restrained and gagged victim was forced to swallow by means of a funnel a large amount of unappetizing, sometimes boiling liquid, molten lead or brass. Substances such as urine, excrement, liquid manure, and silage were used for this purpose. And blood of other victims, menstrual blood. There's a lot of things that they would pour down your mouth. It wasn't water. They just call it the water torture to hide the liquid. Now the rack. These are all real racks. This is a ladder rack. This is a rack, and there's spikes on the table if you look closely. This one has the rolling spikes on it, which was created later. This is an account stated by a person who got put to the rack. Then my trembling body was laid upon the face of a flat rack with my head downward and closed within a circled hole, my belly upmost, my arms and feet pinioned, for I was to receive my main torments. Now ropes were passed over the calf of my leg, the middle of my thigh, and the great of my arm, and these ropes fastened to pins. I received 7 tortures, each torture consisting of 3 complete windings of the pins. This one is specifically designed to break all cartilage. That means to dislocate all the joints on your body, okay? And then they would stop and put all your joints back into place, all over your body, your hand and your arm, your legs, your feet. They put all your joints back into place, and then they'll do it again. But sometimes they'll torture you for a whole day and then let you sit up in the jail for about a week, and then come back and start torturing you again when your body is in the middle of the healing process. So they had a lot of this stuff mastered down, bro. A lot of it. Now the Iron Maiden I think is a falsehood, but there are a lot of these made, so it could be real. And the first Iron Maiden, notice the deep catcher here and notice the mace here, okay? But the first Iron Maiden was created in Sparta and it was named the Nabis Arpegia of Nabis. Nabis was supposedly one of the first recorded sadists of history who lived in Sparta, and he created this device. But supposedly the first Iron Maiden had arms that would open up and would grab you close to it and then squeeze you into the spikes, and then supposedly there was a trap door at the bottom where the body would be discarded once the door was open, and they would get rid of the body into the river underneath the Iron Maiden. But due to the engineering of said time period, I do not believe that it was that intricate or even created, because first of all, it was too messy. And then also, as you see here on this one, and all the spikes aren't all the way up and down, some of these were created to specifically pierce you in areas where the organs weren't affected or punctured, therefore you could live longer and feel the pain. And that is the goal of torture, is to make you feel pain. Is to keep you alive, to feel the most pain possible. Okay. Now the witch's chair, also called the mother-in-law chair, and it's also called the Christian chair. All right. And this is very real, and this was used. All right. There's a multitude of these if you were to do any research. They would put weights on the body, put weights on the hands, and put weights on the feet, and put weights on the back and neck. If you were put inside of one of these, and they would slam these on the top part of your body, of course, all right, to puncture you further and to torture you further. This was used for witches by majority rule. This was used for women, okay? Hence the names. Judas Cradle. This was specifically used for homosexuals, all right? As you can see, the strings here would pull the body up and down, all right, onto this pyramid, all right, and it would completely tear up your rectum, and you could not have any. You might as well become an eunuch after being put to the Judas Cradle. Now the Spanish donkey, as I stated, these weights would be designed in specific ways, and the Spanish Inquisition, of course, as you can see, this is the female. She'd be split in two with the weights put on her and completely destroy everything in the anus and vaginal area. Now, the brazen bull, which historically none of these have ever been found by any form of archaeologist or anything else. There is none in existence that are real. Were they real and were they used? The documents say yes. Common sense probably would say no, because it was too much. And then some of the cases of what it was stated, it was too much. Like for one case I ran across, they stated they put a whole family in one of these, and it was the boy, the mother, the father, the children, everybody was locked up into one. And then they put a fire underneath it, and then there would be horn. There's a piping system inside the head that when the screams of the humans would come out, it would sound like a bull howling. Now, I'd also like to state that the first person who created this also ended up inside of it so they could test the horns. But then the emperor of the time, I forgot his name, took him out and threw him off the hill. He didn't let him die inside there. But he said, just because you have such a heinous mind and you've now shown us your form of profession is death, we will solidify it with your death. Okay, and they pushed him off the cliff. So, I don't think this is real, personally. But there's many pictures of it, there's many drawings of it, and there's many mentionings of it. So it could be. Now, the jail. This is, if you can notice here, the crown symbol. This is used in Britain, I think, against the naval army, okay? And it was used for liars and thieves inside the jail, and they would slam this on your hand, basically, and brand you with it, okay? Now, this is the liar's rack. This was also used in prison, okay? And you would have to balance yourself with these hooks right here, and they have weights. As you can see, the digital version I have right here. And then there'd be a turning pike on the side that they would turn, and this would destroy all of your groin, okay, in the middle, okay? Now, the treadmill. This is where your treadmill device comes from that you're working out with. This is originally incorporated inside jails, and it's a circular device, as you can see, and the only reason they made prisoners start doing this is because they had nothing else for the prisoners to do, so they wanted them to get to work. Alright, and I've also found this to be used during African slave trade, but only in Jamaica. Now, the whirligig is another one, but this was used by military punishment. Okay, the British Naval Army, the British Navy is the British Navy has the most tortures documented under them being used on their own soldiers than any other people in history. So, if you really want to look up some heinous stories pertaining to pirates, or if you want to go down the pirate lane, you probably want to start with the British Navy. All right, now. This is a whirligig, and they would just continue to spin you until you threw up everywhere and completely disoriented, and you were embarrassed by the people in the audience who are laughing at you. Okay? That was maybe about 20% to 30%. The reasoning for all tortures was either high level of sexual gratification, as you may have seen during the Spanish Inquisition and the tortures they used on females, or to be completely embarrassed. And either or can be a high level of emasculation for males. Okay? As males were also put inside the torture chamber during the Spanish Inquisition, it was just that the majority of the victims were females. Now, pirates walking the plank. The walking of the plank is specifically used for the sharks that were following the ships and were eating the people. Kiss the gunner's daughter. You get on the cannon, we whip you on the cannon, and then the cannon disembowels you. You understand? Okay? The pirate. Keel hauling. Keel hauling is a form of punishment meted out to sailors at sea. The sailor was tied to a line that looped beneath the vessel, thrown overboard on one side of the ship, and dragged under the ship's keel, either from one side of the ship to the other, or the length of the ship from bow to stern, as the whole was usually covered in barnacles and other marine growth. If the offender was pulled quickly, keel hauling would typically result in serious cuts, loss of limbs, and even decapitation. If the victim was dragged slowly, his weight might lower him sufficiently to miss the barnacles, but this method would frequently result in his drowning. Okay, now scaphism, the boats. Now, the execution is performed like this. And this was done by the ancient Persians, the same Persians that they show you with Sparta. And I might do a torture lecture for ancient civilizations because they held up with it too, and every culture has different fashions on how they go about this type of stuff. So this was what the Persians would do to prisoners of their own or prisoners of war. 2 boats are used that exactly fit. The prisoner is put on his back in one of them, and the other is laid on top of it, but with the man's arms and feet outside, while the rest of his body is inside the 2 boats. They then offer him food, and if he refuses it, they force him to eat it by pricking his eyes. Then they drench him with a mixture of milk and honey, pouring it not only in his mouth, but all over his face. They keep his face constantly turned toward the sun, and it becomes completely covered by the swarms of flies that settle on it. Now, these flies also have eggs inside the body, and have eggs inside the mouth, and the person ends up swallowing those eggs. So, and as within the boats, he does that which all who eat and drink must do, which is shit and piss. Creeping things and vermin spring out of the corruption and rottenness of the shit and piss, and these enter into his bowels and slowly eat him away. When he is dead and the upper boat is removed, his body is a mass of maggots, and swarms of insects are preying on him, growing in his innards. In this way, Mithridates, after suffering for 17 days, at last expired. Okay? So he suffered for 17 days like this, and when you take off the top boat, all you'll see is a mass of maggots floating, eating up everything. The bones are gone, everything is gone. You understand? It might just be bones there, you know? So everything is gone, the flesh is gone, the decomposition has settled in. Okay? And they'll also tie you to a tree and do this. You can also do the intestinal crank by tying to a tree. You cut out the intestines and you nail it to a tree, and then you whip him and make him walk around the tree in a circle until he disembowels himself. Okay? When I showed you the tongs were used to, you can also drop red hot coals in a person's asshole. You open up the asshole a little bit and drop a red hot coal on the inside. Or the French, they mastered it. They mastered the process in burning out the eyeballs with a coal from the fire. Okay? Now, this is Barbary. This is what some of the Persians or Turks were. Yeah, these are Turks right here. You can observe the turban on the top of the head. Okay? This is kissing the gunner's daughter. We got the person on top of the thing right here. We got the Barbary. We got the person hanging on the gates of the city. Person being split in two by the boats. Person being hung up right here on different forms of crosses. Okay. You got person being impaled. The barrel roll. Person being built inside the wall. Now, there's a lot of the built inside the wall thing, especially for the old Catholic churches. Nuns that were being caught being promiscuous were killed and were put inside the wall as the wall was being built. on the chapels. And that's also for the infant children who were being born out of adulterous unions and incestuous unions. They would be built inside the wall. And that is also the true essence of meaning laying a cornerstone to the building. Because usually this cornerstone, which is cement, has human bones inside of it. Okay? Please understand that. And the iron boot sometimes was also a torture that could be done with cement, because when cement hardens, it will crack your bones. Okay? So that's a slow torture as well. Now, the bias, abuse of power. However, throughout history, especially in ancient Rome and medieval Europe, people in authority had a tendency to abuse their power to discriminate against people they didn't like or people who didn't fit into their mold as to who the ideal person was. During times when people were superstitious and paranoid and were not allowed to read the Bible for themselves, common people would accuse others of crimes they didn't commit simply because they didn't get along with them, and usually the accusers were believed. Even when there was no evidence, the people blamed would be publicly punished and executed. During the Spanish Inquisition, the priests and cardinals who enforced the Inquisition had license to burn anyone, including kings and queens. Now, when we stay right here, we talk about with the accusers and who is being accused. We have to understand that if we both planted plants at the same time, and your plants came out better than me, I'd consider you a witch, and you'd be burned at the stake. It was that simple, okay? If your child came home with better grades than me, or if you could read and write and I couldn't read and write, or if your bread didn't get moldy and my bread got moldy, you were passing a spell on me, okay? Now, there's a lot of things going on with the insanity that we have here, and the insanity comes from a lot of different areas, but let's go ahead and read this one real quick, okay? The mental torture induced by imprisonment with its destructive effects upon initiative, willpower, originality, and ambition can be incalculable. Upon some natures, the segregation of mind is even more paralyzing and cumulative in its effects than is any form of physical segregation. The contention that the modern prison is a convalescent home or a rest camp and errs on the side of leniency or beneficence is an erroneous, and its implications, as are the ideas secured by visitors who are conveyed around a model prison upon a tour of inspection. So we have to understand here is that what he is stating is that you may think that because they're sitting in a box in a jail and they get 3 meals a day, that they're not getting any form of torture. When you have to understand that all torture is psychological like everything else on this planet. So the form of torture that we see today, which is jail or the penitentiary system, is actually supposedly the sharpest form of torture, but that's only towards the centuries before us, not the centuries ahead of us. You see, what has happened with mankind and what has happened during the course of this torture that was going on in old Europe was conformity, adaptation. We got bored. Nobody was scared of being slaughtered. Nobody was scared of going to the scaffold and getting their arms ripped off or getting their head chopped off. Why? Because I was raised watching it. I've seen it so many fucking times that it doesn't do nothing to my brain. There is no fear. Okay? Now, right now, there is no fear of penitentiary. But there is a fear of the guillotine. There is a fear of the breast ripper. There is a fear of being walked around the city with branks on your head. There is a fear of that right now. Why? Because it is unknown to the people. And what people do not know, they fear. Because you don't know the result. And you haven't studied it. You don't even know the soul ripping that occurs when some of these things are implicated and when they're done, or what they're designed to do, especially to your whole person and your character. To rip the sinews out of the person. The sinews is a word that was used in correlation to power and specific muscle strands that are inside the body that they knew would take out your whole function. Okay? Because some tortures specifically was based on ripping certain muscles out. So that arm would be disabled, but you'd still have it. So you'd look like a fucking mutant wherever you went. Okay? At any given time in Europe, going to the market, out of 10 people, you were most likely to see at least 3 to 4 with some type of mutilation done to them. And one of those 3 to 4 are going to be severely mutilated where they can't walk or they can't talk or they can't see. You see what I'm saying? This is the everyday shit that was going on in old Europe. This is the everyday probability that can occur right now. Why? Because the majority of the planet is in European mind frame and they do not know what European is. That is the whole point. Now, in closing, even though in modern times the Western Hemisphere has banned torture and execution, is illegal in many places, torture is and always has been around and will continue to be. Someday, when space travel becomes commonplace, we may execute people by throwing them into outer space naked or forcing them to go without oxygen. We may someday experience a new wave of torture in which new implements are invented unlike anything ever seen since ancient Rome, the Spanish Inquisition, or medieval England. Stamping out torture and execution completely will most likely never happen. Understand that you are on a violent planet. Okay? I got a couple of extra slides here, so we'll go through them. And the information that will be inside the book that I write based on this will be far greater than what you have seen today in the lecture. There will be far more information compacted in the book that will solidify the theory of it being attached to its origin. I mean, our modern day justice system being attached to the origins of the justice systems in Europe and the mentality, the nature, and the spirit which comes with that. Alright? Now, this is a toy that's found out of 17th century Italy of a demon, of a devil, basically, that talks to you. Okay? This right here is another form of breast ripper, and this right here is the iron gag. There's another form of iron gag. We put in the mouth, we shut your fucking mouth when we take you to the execution, and we will take you to the stake to burn your ass for your heresy, for your heretical ideas. Your ideas that the earth spins around the sun is heresy. You understand? And a lot of this was going on. You have to understand that the medical industry was built off of the attitude of destroying a lot of the women because the women were midwives, and the women would alleviate the pain of pregnancy and childbirth. So because they alleviated the pain, the Caucasians thought that they were against God because God ordained that women feel pain during the course of birth through the Bible. So you are against God, therefore you're a fucking heretic. Okay? Now I put this right here because I thought it was very interesting on how the original Caligula from Rome looks just like little dude in the Game of Thrones show. Okay? So we need to understand that. Okay? We got the Caligula and we got the Caligula. Right here. Alright? Dementia. Now, this is a real Spanish Inquisition mask that was used, and they would pour oil through the funnels right here in the ears and boil the brain, basically. And they liked using boiling oil, boiling water, and boiling and molten lead. And that's the part that I need to go in on. As you have witnessed today, there is high-level insanity going on. Now, this insanity is correlated to a lot of elements that actually stem from Greece. For instance, molten lead was used in Greece like chocolate syrup is used today. They used to put molten lead on top of their food. They used to put molten lead every damn where. Not only that, but the lead cups. The cups that they used in medieval time periods were also made of lead and would also knock them out and give them lead poisoning. If we pay attention today, the tips of bullets are used in. The tips of bullets have lead in them. Not only that, but if we look at what was going on in the 40s and 50s with lead being in the paint, the Caucasian has a connection with the lead and has to stay with lead inside of his DNA, but lead does alter the brain. Okay? Now, I also want to go into the McLeod syndrome. I think it's called the McLeod syndrome. The kin gene that King Henry VIII has, where he can't produce no children, and he turns insane after the age of 35 to 40 years old. Okay, this is probably a majority rule thing that goes on with the culture that stems out of Europe. Okay, it's a recessive genetical scenario, and it's called the McLeod syndrome. Okay, now I also want to go in on the insanity a little bit further. How did we create images of the vampire, Dracula, werewolf, and all of that during said time period? And why were animals respected as humans, or to have a conscious understanding as a human would have? The reason being is because of the rotten wheat. The wheat that they survived off of became rotten for a time period and it created a chemical that they still use in LSD today, which is the basis of acid or LSD is a chemical called erot, and erot grows on old molded wheat. Okay, now what does erot do? Erot makes the body contort in crazy different positions. So when you look at these exorcist type movies or horror movies where people are twisting their body up in crazy fucking positions and they're talking about animals and they think animals are gonna attack them and they're trying to do things with animals, all of that comes from the symptoms of being high off of a drug called erot, which is E-R-A-T. You can look it up. It's molded wheat. Now, another level of the insanity that was going on with so I hit the molten lead, the erot. Another level of insanity was the shit. Okay, at any given time in old Europe, the ground was at least a foot to 2 feet thick with nothing but feces, the carcasses of dead rats, cats, dogs, horses, and even humans, and then fish as well, because fish were being sold in the market. Inside this foot to 2 feet thick hay, a mixture of dead bodies and feces and urine, and that feces and urine would also come from humans. You also had maggots, flies, fleas, lice. Okay? Now, maggots, the flies, lice, and fleas could also have lawyers in court, which is another fact that will be documented inside the book. And so could animals such as pigs and wolves. And there are cases that are famous throughout Europe of pigs and wolves being taken to court and being dressed as humans and being held in court as humans. Not only that, to go so far to say is that they invited other wolves and pigs to witness their fellow pig be taken to the goddamn stake and burned. You understand? So the mentality and the reason, that's why I was talking about the feces. The feces, you can actually get high off of the smell of shit. So there is so much funky smell in the air, including with the dead bodies that's hanging in the air, that the smell alone would keep them intoxicated on a high level of dementia, and what we see right here. Now, these are straitjackets, which are also considered a torture device, and these right here are steaming chambers that were found in insane asylums in early America and old Europe. This is what it looks like when you are tar and feathered. As tar and feathering was a process that went on a lot, as you just witnessed. You heard me mention tar a couple of times during the course of the hanging and what went on at the scaffold. Okay? Now, this is the chair. This chair is a Chinese torture chair. This is not old Europe. This is a Chinese torture chair right here. I put it in here because I thought it was interesting. Okay? This is original congenital syphilis and what it did to people back in the day. This is what syphilis really looks like. Okay? This is what it'll do to you. This is a mask that was worn by doctors during the plagues. During the bubonic plague, doctors were seen wearing these type of masks, like a long bird, in order to heal people in order not to get sick. Okay, which we will be talking. I will be doing a lecture on the Black Plague sooner or later here, but there are many things we need to discover. Okay, now this is the original Yoda, found in a 13th century document, religious document. I think this is Italian, and this is where Yoda from Star Wars comes from. I thought that was interesting, as there are many other beings drawn in these books that are the basis of a lot of movies, so-called like movie, The Never-Ending Story, some of Jim Henson's work. There's a lot of other, places throughout Hollywood where these entities have showed up. For instance, the flying monkeys of Wizard of Oz actually comes from one of these images drawn in one of these old religious documents. Okay, now last but not least, I put this up here to show you the truth. This picture was taken in, I think, in 1921. This happened in Tennessee, where they hung an elephant. So don't worry about us hanging no niggas. Don't worry about us hanging no crackers. We'll hang an elephant's ass if we got to. Don't fuck around. This is American justice, and we don't play with the shit. And I'm tired of irresponsible fucks out here that don't have enough seriousness in them and don't have enough masculinity in them, okay? And they're creating these dumbass situations that we see on TV, okay? Now we have to understand, before 1850, I do believe we were all in a masculine hell. You see, mammals mammals prove their dominance by murder and death and killing, okay? This is part of the reason why you don't know too much history about Africa. Why? Because their human sacrifices were far superior. That made their magic far superior, and it was harder to explain. Why? Because their social circles were completely Trump tight and strict, and everybody had their mama and daddy, and they still understood what love was, okay? So there was a lot of things that are different in how human sacrifices went about, but in essence, Caucasians have created human sacrifice with all racial groups on the planet. That's why they're in the position that they are in, for number one. For number two, African Americans are the only group and only race of people on the planet that do not have wholesale slaughter or any type of successful revolution inside our DNA or blood. Okay? We have not committed torture on anybody. We are the most sensitive race on the planet due to the fact that we have not had the allowance or we have not had the force to commit war or to have blood on our hands for a unified effort. We cannot claim over 100 bodies, and that's why we are disrespected on this planet, because we have no power, and we have shown no power, and yet we have feminine ass niggas out here who will not guarantee that we get said power. Okay? So that's the reality. Alright? So I think I've done it all with this one. This is the true torture lecture, man. We got more coming. It's gonna be more heat coming. You know, y'all fuck with me. Support what's going down. There's more information coming. I'm gonna have another lecture out before the summer's out, man. Y'all get at me. Peace. Oh, check the website, theguy720.com. Check everything that I'm doing everywhere. Support the music. Buy some jewelry. Get at me. Peace.